Shalom from Israel, I'm Ariel Ben Aram. This week we're going to reflect on chapter 24 of the book of Psalms by King David. We start verse 1. The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. So David starts acknowledging that everything comes from God. This is an amazing, not amazing, this is the approach to address our Creator. Every time we want to communicate with Him, we're going to say, to establish, to renew this covenant, which we're going to talk about that later in the next verse, probably, in the next chapter. It's like the premise, it's like the prerequisite, is that the precondition to bond with our Creator. We have to acknowledge that He is such. So the answer is very simple. We have referred to this many times before. It has to do with acknowledging and recognizing that we are part of a plan that belongs to God, that comes from God. That plan is called life, it's called the material world. It has a purpose. And that purpose, as we have said many times also before, had to do with making goodness prevail in this plan. Then we realize that goodness is our common bond with Him. This is essential. So when David says the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. So it's like, what part of your plan? God, tell us what the plan is. Then the plan is the Torah. There's a purpose for Israel to exist. There is a purpose for living in the land of Israel. There is a purpose, there is an objective, an end, to be the lights for the nations. And then we have to understand what this light is, which is the same goodness that we have been mentioning before. So we have to live by, with, for, and towards goodness. So we have to understand, when we acknowledge God, we have to understand, so what is it? What is the whole idea of acknowledging God as our Creator? It has to do actually not with God, it has to do actually with us. It's about our identity. See, when we say everything comes from God, we're saying to ourselves, this is our essence and true identity. We are God's image and likeness. So this is for us. God doesn't need to be recognized or acknowledged. We have to acknowledge Him and recognize Him in us and in His creation, as David well mentions here. We have to see God in His creation that belongs to Him. So then we say, oh, this is the fear of God, like, ah. So when we get to that realization, really like completely, then the reverence, the respect comes. So let's keep in mind when we pray about this. Actually, every morning we read, in our daily prayers in Judaism, this is exactly what we do. We start by thanking Him for giving us life, and then recognizing and acknowledging Him as the owner and director and conductor of His creation. So we say, Hallelujah, Hallelujah. We are praising Him before we come to His presence. So there is a process in these prayers. There's a seder, an order. So then one, we acknowledge that then we enter to be with Him as part of Him, that Shema. And then when we are there, like consciously aware of our bond with God, then we speak to Him. And then if it's a Monday, it's a Thursday, or a Shabbat, then we read what He's telling us that week from the Torah and the prophets. And then we listen, we read, and then we implement that message in our consciousness, integrated in everything we think, feel, speak, and do. That's essential. Then verse 2, because He founded it on the seas and established it on the waters. So he's talking about basically the material world, the planet. So we see the earth, the soil, the ground, holding. It's like this gravity. There's something that holds everything together. They will acknowledge that too. It's like God, you integrate everything. You keep it together. And the proof of this is our existence in this planet. We see we belong here. Then verse 3, who may ascend, this is a question, a philosophical question that King David asks after this introduction. Who may ascend the mountain of the Lord? So it's like, after recognizing who God is, then the question is, who's going to be with Him? Who is able to ascend to God's place, to God's mountain? It's not just a philosophical question, it's an ethical implication, by the way. It's like, who's good enough to reach up to this goodness? And the answer is obvious. You have to be good in order to reach out goodness. This is very important. We cannot be good and we cannot do goodness if we're not motivated by goodness. That's what we mean when we say that goodness is the cause and the effect. Love is the cause and its effect. Its cause and its effect. So these are questions that have to be with this God who created everything. It's like, who can reach up to Him? So this is an ascent, that it is clear. Who may ascend? Who is able to ascend? It's an ascent. It is. So it's not like you have to go down or continue at the horizontal level. We need to elevate our consciousness, our awareness to the highest level of consciousness. And then the highest we ascend, the sooner we are with Him, with God. So let's pay attention to every word here because this is important. It's who may ascend. It's an ascent. He says, yes, it is. Now, what is the mountain of the Lord? Again, it's a mountain, it's something solid, it's something hard to move, to be moved. But again, here in Judaism, we know that the mountain of the Lord is the temple of Jerusalem, Har Moriah, the Temple Mount, mountain. And it's interesting because we're talking about mountains and God, Israel, and then we immediately think about the desert, Sinai, Mount Sinai. And who was the one able to ascend? Moses. Now, let me say, he's the only one who was granted that privilege. Yes. In those times, yes. Because we were not prepared. It was evident. We came from slavery. We still have this slave mentality. We couldn't get close. You have to be at the surface, at the level of the ground. Except Moshe. He prepared himself, and actually God prepared him to ascend. But then he told us later, you will ascend also in the land that I will give you. You will come 3 times a year. You will ascend the mountain. You will come to me. I will appear to you, and you will see me, that says God. And then 3 times a year we come, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, to see him, to ascend to Israel, to Jerusalem. And yes, Israel also is an ascent. We came out of the land of Egypt. He brought us out up to, it's like we ascended from Egypt. Egypt was the lowest place, the lowest level of consciousness. And we have to ascend to Israel. We made aliyah to Israel. We ascend to Israel. Coming to Israel is an ascent. So here clearly the mountain of the Lord is the temple. And what is the temple? Again, we have to repeat this. Why? Because it's repeated every time that we see the mountain of the Lord. We're talking about our connection, the awareness of our permanent connection with God. That's the mountain of the Lord. That's the temple. That's what we have to rebuild. We have to reestablish, rebuild that permanent awareness of our bond, eternal bond with Him and His love. And then the answer, the one, verse 4, the one who has clean hands and a pure heart. How we translate that? Goodness. The one who is good. A person who is good has a clean hands and a pure heart. It's evident. Can't be otherwise. Otherwise, it's not good. Oh, we mentioned, in order to ascend, to reestablish that connection, to bond with God, we have to ascend to goodness. Goodness is a higher level of consciousness. We know that. When we are good, we know that we're in a higher place. We know that. So we're not good, we're in the lowest or lower place. We also know that. We know. So goodness is an ascent. Love is an ascent. All the positive qualities in consciousness are ascended traits and qualities and attributes. Those are not low, those are high. So let's not take goodness and love for granted as something that is superficial or low, that we can step on. No. We have to ascend to them. So achieving the consciousness of goodness in our thoughts, in our discernment, in our mind, in our feelings, in our emotions, in our passions and our instincts is an ascent. That's why it's difficult. It's easier to fall, to go lower, than to ascend. Now, the good news is that it's not difficult. We say, well, always the ascents are difficult, you get tired. From the gravitational point of view, it's true. It's true. It's always harder to ascend physically. And some may say also intellectually, morally, ethically, we disagree on that. It's available. Goodness is in the air. Why? Because it supports life. So air is good. Light, sunlight, moonlight, those things are good. Water. It's accessible to us in our consciousness. We just have to embrace it. So in order to be good, we have to be good. It is not like a major effort to be good. It's like, why? If we embrace it so easily when people love us and people are good to us and we're so happy and we're so thankful, why is that we cannot do that? Why is that to be difficult? No, it isn't. Who said that? And then goodness is accompanied with clean hands and pure heart, meaning righteousness, justice, fairness, doing the right thing, the correct thing to do. In other words, applying this goodness for the benefits of everybody involved and not in detriment or at expense of other people, others, or the environment. It doesn't have to be that way, and we know that. So there is nothing difficult about being loving and being good. It's a matter of choice. We choose to be angry, we choose to be upset, we choose to be hateful, envious, lustful, wrathful, haughty, arrogant. But we're good. So we want to bond with God, we better be good. So this is evident, it's a moral question, it's a moral answer. So God is accessible as goodness, that the goodness that He shows to us in His creation, sustaining us, our lives, the world. Then we have to be like Him. That's the lesson. That's the image and likeness that we were mentioning before. We are, we were like God because He created us in His image and likeness. We have to find out who God is then. That we don't know that there's no definition. We know that there are traits, attributes, qualities, values, principles by which we live every day. So that's the idea. Who does not trust in an idol or swear by a false god. So we have to insist, we have to keep repeating why David repeats, the prophets repeats, the Torah repeats, so we have to repeat. We mentioned many times before, what's the point? So much repetition in the Torah. Don't do idolatry, don't go after idols, don't go after false gods. Why so much repeated? It's like dozens of times. For the same reason that we mentioned a moment ago. Goodness doesn't cohabit, doesn't coexist, doesn't dwell with anything different than goodness. You say, yeah, but it's possible that a good person would be whatever, an evil person, and of course, a matter of choice, everything is possible. But the idea is to choose goodness and the attributes, trends, qualities, traits of goodness. So we have to insist, we cannot be good and evil at the same time. We can't. Now we say, I can be evil one time and then I'm going to be good in next time. It doesn't work that way either. We're losing. We're subtracting every time that we do something negative. We lose, we know. Energy, peace, balance, focus, intention, well-being, we also end up losing something when we don't look for goodness. It's a matter of choice, yes. But again, let's try to make all our choices positive, so that we live on the positive side. We don't attract anything negative. And we'll be happier than having to deal with negativity all the time. It's like, oh, I'm being good, but I get this. And I make it all with all my heart, and this is what I get as a result. This is what I get in exchange, etc. Let's pay a closer attention to that. Am I really doing the right thing? And I'm dealing with the right people? Do I have the right friends? Do I shelter the right ideas and principles? What about if I'm too much liberal, politically correct, light? Everything has consequences, especially the choices we make. So let's continue. Do not trust on an idol. What we define as idol. We always say that idols and false gods, that's what we call it here in this blog. Egos, fantasies, and illusions. Something that we build. We know that they're not gods. It belongs to the mythology and the kind of thing. Ignorant people used to believe in gods and this kind of thing, the forces of nature. But we don't have that now. In some cultures, they still do that. They still believe in that. But most people now, what are their idols? What are their idols? So let's make our own inventory. What are my fantasies? What are my addictions? What are my obsessions? What are my attachments? What are my habits? What are my ideas, my ideologies? What do I believe? Is it right? Is it positive? Is it good? Or is something that is out of my own fabrication, looking to please my lust, envy, greed, haughtiness, and these negative traits and trends in consciousness? Those are the idols. Then we have to be careful then. So this is, or swear, meaning believing, by a false god. In this case, what is a false god? Something that is not positive, something that is not good. I'm gonna swear by my greed. I'm gonna swear by my ambition. I'm gonna swear by my almighty power to get what I want. That's a god. It's called self. So our prophets, they quote Pharaoh from Egypt, like, the river is mine, I created it, is mine. Yeah. The man was so arrogant that he used to say, I created everything, it's mine. You're human, it's impossible that you can create a river. What are you talking about? It's ego trip. The problem is that these people are in power. The kings, the princes, the presidents, the leaders. What do they represent? Are they representing something good for us? Or just the personal agendas? But then, that's another story. Okay, verse 5. They will receive blessing from the Lord and compensation, reward. Some people say vindication from God, their Redeemer. So David is using now another trait, another quality, another attribute of God, which is redemption. It's our Redeemer. It's dozens of times repeated in the Torah, prophets, and the Hebrew Bible. So in other words, if we choose goodness, goodness is what we're going to get. What is goodness? Blessing. The Latin, we have said this many times, the Latin word for blessings comes from the root goodness. Benediction is bene is good. Diction is to say goodness. It's a blessing in English. So that's verse 5. Then we go to verse 6. It says, such is the generation of those who seek him. In other words, if we pursue goodness, this is what we get. Goodness. Who seek your face, God of Jacob. It's interesting. Who seek your face. What is the face of God? God doesn't have face. We know that. It's what we see in his creation. Goodness. That's the face of God. God's love. That's the radiance of his face. It's like the light that is reflected in his creation. That's what, we know God by what we see he did. It's the only way. This is Judaism. This is not other religion that we can like talk. It's like you have a man in front of you, an old man with a crown, or whoever, or whatever. We're talking about ways and attributes. We're not talking about human qualities or traits or features or image. So we say your face, the face of God, like the hand of God, the heart of God, the eyes of God, the back of God. It's mentioned in the Torah. We're talking about qualities, traits, attributes by which he relates to us and to his creation. We're talking about the back of God. We have mentioned that. Exodus chapter 34, verse 6 and 7. So Moses basically wanted to know God. He said, show me your face, I want to see you. He said, it's impossible, you cannot see me. There's no... You're not going to be able to see me, I'm not human. There's no way. So then Moses understood. It's like, oh, okay. So he said, I can show you my ways. That you can know. And then the 13 principles of compassion, something called the 13 principles of mercy. Then those are qualities, traits by which God relates to us. And then we know that all of them are goodness. And that is how we have to relate to him. Okay. Verse 7, lift up your heads, you gates. This is a very interesting metaphor. Because David is asking heads and gates. It's like, what is a head? Understanding. What is gate? Gate is an opening. It's like, open your understanding, heads. I need to repeat this several times. Be lifted up. We're talking about an ascent. It's like, elevate your understanding. Let's try to understand this. You ancient doors. We're talking about like our consciousness from thousands of years. We have consciousness of our past. It's like, okay, yeah, we learn the past, people teach us that, it's a history, historical process. But then we know that we're old, we're not new, we have been here for quite a while. Ancient doors. It's like, your consciousness, you're so old. Open up yourself, elevate yourself. Old consciousness. That the King of Glory may come in. We have to open an understanding in order to allow this that we cannot understand about God to be present in our consciousness. So this gate, this head, is our consciousness. We have to open up and elevate. elevate enough so we can allow this new awareness that we don't know, who is God, to enter in our consciousness. So this has to do with the final redemption in Judaism. It's like once we allow that process, I mean, when we achieve this process of elevating our consciousness in order to allow God to enter in our understanding, then that's it. We're done. Because at the moment we haven't done this. It's evident David is asking for it. We have to do this. We have to elevate our consciousness. Open up our understanding. Elevate the capacity to understand. So this highest awareness, this highest knowledge that we don't grasp can be settled, sit, enthroned in our consciousness. Next verse, which is a consequent question: who is the King of glory? The Lord is strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. So this is interesting. We're talking about a warrior king entering the doors of our consciousness, entering Jerusalem, the walled city. That's the highest level of consciousness, by the way, Jerusalem. This is what he's referring indirectly. Gates, the gates of a city. Lift our heads also is not just elevating our understanding, straightening up. Elevate. It's like the king is coming straight up. Elevate. Something like that. Strong and mighty. We know that God is strong and mighty because He's the owner of His creation. He's strong enough to create everything. Of course, this is real strength to be able to create everything. And mighty, this power is the power to sustain His creation. Some people say the issue here is not that God created everything. He sustains it. That's the issue here. So in other words, we can build something like a table, a camera, something like that, but that's it. It's a piece of something. But to give it life and sustain the living quality of this that we have created, that's out of our reach. It belongs to God only. Now, we can create robots, and we can generate a battery to make them work, walk, whatever. We cannot compare artificial life, artificial intelligence to real life. We don't know how to do that. We don't. So, verse 9 again is repeated. Lift up your heads, you gates. Lift them up, you ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. So David is calling our attention twice in this chapter. Like, hey, wake up. And he mentioned that at the beginning, he's finishing this chapter exactly with the same idea. Elevate your consciousness to God so you can bond with God. So God can come into your consciousness. Verse 10 and last verse of this chapter 24. Another repetition. Who is the King of glory? The Lord Almighty. He is the King of glory. And again, let's understand glory, majesty, splendor, radiance, light as the way we see God in His creation. And when we see goodness, we see life. We see that it's a loving force behind everything. And that force, that love, is the love of God, from which we came and from which everything came. And then let's start establishing this connection with God, this bond with God, our common essence with Him, which is His love, with our love. We do this process through loving. That's how we achieve this awareness, this redemption, this freedom, this enter into this new level of knowing God. So with these reflections, we finish our analysis of Psalm 24 by King David. We wish you, as usual, an abundantly blessed week. Shabbat Shalom, and until next week.